We were raised together, there was not exactly a year distinction in our ages. I really want not say that we were aliens to any types of disagreement or debate. Amicability was the spirit of our friendship, and the variety and differentiation that remained alive in our characters moved us closer together. Elizabeth was of a more quiet and more thought demeanor. Be that as it may, with all my vigor, I was fit for a more extraordinary application and was all the more profoundly stricken with the hunger for information. She busied herself with following the aeronautical manifestations of the artists, and in the superb and wondrous scenes which encompassed our Swiss home, the wonderful states of the mountains, the progressions of the seasons, storm and quiet, the quietness of winter, and the life and disturbance of our alpine summers, she tracked down adequate extension for profound respect and joy. While my sidekick mulled over with a serious and fulfilled soul the sublime appearances of things, I took pleasure in examining their causes. The world was to me a mysterious which I wanted to divine. Interest, sincere examination to gain proficiency with the secret laws of nature, energy much the same as happiness, as they were unfurled to me, are among the earliest sensations I can recollect. On the introduction of a subsequent child, my lesser by 7 years, my folks surrendered completely their meandering life and fixed themselves in their local country. We had a house in Geneva, and a campaign on Bellerive, the eastern shore of the lake, at the distance of preferably additional over an association from the city. We dwelled primarily in the last option, and the existences of my folks were passed in significant detachment. It was my attitude to keep away from a group and to join myself intensely to a couple. I was unconcerned, consequently, to my school colleagues overall, however I joined myself in the obligations of the dearest kinship to one among them. Henry Clerval was the child of a vendor of Geneva. He was a kid of particular ability and extravagant. He adored undertaking, difficulty, and even risk for the good of its own. He was profoundly perused in books of valor and sentiment. He created courageous tunes and started to compose numerous a story of charm and chivalrous experience. He attempted to make us act plays and to go into disguises, in which the characters were drawn from the legends of Roncesvalles, of the Round Table of King Arthur, and the gallant train who shed their blood to recover the blessed catacomb from the hands of the unbelievers. No person might have passed a more joyful youth than myself. My folks were moved by the actual soul of consideration and extravagance. We felt that they were not the despots to manage our part as per their fancy, however the specialists and makers of the multitude of many pleasures which we appreciated. At the point when I blended with different families I particularly recognized how curiously lucky my parcel was, and appreciation helped the advancement of obedient love. My attitude was in some cases fierce, and my interests passionate, yet by some regulation in my temperature they were turned not towards immature pursuits but rather to an enthusiastic longing to learn, and not to unpredictably realize all things. I admit that neither the construction of dialects, nor the code of legislatures, nor the legislative issues of different states had attractions for me. It was the privileged insights of paradise and earth that I wanted to learn, and whether it was the outward substance of things or the internal soul of nature and the strange soul of man that involved me, still my requests were coordinated to the magical, or in its most noteworthy sense, the actual mysteries of the world. In the meantime Clerval involved himself, as it were, with the ethical relations of things. The bustling phase of life, the excellencies of legends, and the activities of men were his subject, and his expectation and his fantasy was to become one among those whose names are kept in story as the courageous and brave supporters of our species. The pious soul of Elizabeth sparkled like a place of worship devoted light in our tranquil home. Her compassion was our own, her grin, her delicate voice, the sweet look of her divine eyes, were ever there to favor and vivify us. She was the living soul of adoration to relax and draw in. I could have become dreary in my review, unpleasant through the fervency of my tendency, however, that she was there to quell me to a similarity to her own delicacy. Furthermore, Clerval, might nothing at some point settle in on the honorable soul of Clerval? However, he probably won't have been so entirely altruistic, so smart in his liberality, so brimming with generosity and delicacy in the midst of his energy for daring adventure, had she not unfurled to him the genuine beauty of value and made the doing great the end and point of his taking off aspiration. I feel wonderful delight in harping on the memories of life as a youngster, before mishap had spoiled my brain and changed its splendid dreams of broad convenience into bleak and restricted reflections upon self. Moreover, in drawing the image of my initial days, I additionally record those occasions which drove, by oblivious strides, to my after-story of wretchedness, for when I would record to myself for the introduction of that enthusiasm which a short time later governed my fate, I find it emerge, similar to a mountain stream, from shameful and nearly neglected sources. In any case, enlarging as it continued, it turned into the downpour which, in its course, has cleared away the entirety of my expectations and delights. Normal way of thinking is the virtuoso that has controlled my destiny. I want, consequently, in this portrayal, to express those realities which prompted my preference for that science. At the point when I was 13 years old, we as a whole went on a party of delight to the showers close to Thonon. The nastiness of the weather conditions obliged us to stay a day restricted to the motel. In this house I risked to track down a volume of Crafted by Cornelius Agrippa. I opened it with unresponsiveness, the hypothesis which he endeavors to show and the superb realities which he relates before long changed this inclination into excitement. Another light appeared to sunrise upon my psyche, and jumping with bliss, I conveyed my revelation to my dad. My dad took a gander at the cover sheet of my book and said, "Ah, Cornelius Agrippa. My dear Victor, don't burn through your time upon this, it is miserable rubbish." If, rather than this comment, my dad had gone to considerable lengths to clarify for me that the standards of Agrippa had been completely detonated and that a cutting-edge arrangement of science had been presented which had a lot more noteworthy abilities than the old, in light of the fact that the powers of the last option were fanciful, while those of the previous were genuine and pragmatic, under such conditions I ought to positively have tossed Agrippa to the side and have satisfied my creative mind, warmed as it was, by getting back with more noteworthy fervency to my previous examinations. It is even conceivable that the train of my thoughts couldn't have ever gotten the deadly drive that prompted my ruin. Yet, the superficial look my dad had taken of my volume in no way, shape or form guaranteed me that he was familiar with its items, and I kept on perusing with the best energy. At the point when I got back, my most memorable consideration was to obtain the entire works of this creator, and subsequently of Paracelsus and Albertus Magnus. I read and concentrated on the wild likes of these journalists with a muse. They appeared to me treasures known to not many other than myself. I have portrayed myself as continuously having been permeated with an intense yearning to enter the mysteries of nature. Regardless of the extraordinary work and superb revelations of current thinkers, I generally came from my examinations unhappy and unsatisfied. Sir Isaac Newton is said to have declared that he felt like a youngster getting shells next to the incredible and neglected expanse of truth. Those of his replacements in each part of normal way of thinking with whom I was familiar showed up even to my kids' worries as tyros took part in a similar pursuit. The unschooled laborer viewed the components around him and was familiar with their down-to-earth utilizes. The most scholarly logician knew minimal more. He had somewhat revealed the substance of nature, however her unfading lineaments were as yet a marvel and a secret. He could analyze, anatomize, and give names, yet, not to discuss a last reason, causes in their optional and tertiary grades were completely obscure to him. I had looked at the strongholds and hindrances that appeared to hold people back from entering the fortification of nature, and carelessly and unconsciously I had repined. In any case, here were books, and here were men who had entered further and knew more. I took their statement for all that they affirmed, and I turned into their follower. It might seem weird that such ought to emerge in the 18th 100 years, yet while I followed the daily practice of training in the schools of Geneva, I was, by and large, self-educated as to my number one examinations. My dad was not logical, and I was passed on to battle with a youngster's visual deficiency, added to an understudy's hunger for information. Under the direction of my new preceptors I entered with the best constancy into the pursuit of the scholar's stone and the solution of life. However, the last option before long acquired my full focus. Abundance was a subpar object, yet what greatness would go to the revelation in the event that I could exile sickness from the human casing and render man resistant to any however of vicious passing. Nor were these my main dreams. The raising of phantoms or fiends was a commitment generously concurred by my number one creators, the satisfaction of which I generally enthusiastically looked for, and in the event that my mantras were dependably fruitless, I credited the disappointment preferably to my own naivete and botch over to a need of expertise or loyalty in my educators. What's more, hence for a period I was involved by detonated frameworks, blending, similar to an unadept, 1,000 problematic speculations and struggling frantically in a very swamp of diverse information, directed by an enthusiastic creative mind and silly thinking, till a mishap again changed the current of my thoughts. At the point when I was around 15 years of age we had resigned to our home close to Belrive, when we saw a most rough and horrendous tempest. It progressed from behind the mountains of Jura, and the thunder burst on the double with terrible commotion from different quarters of the sky. I stayed, while the tempest endured, watching its encouraging with interest and pleasure. As I remained at the entryway, on an unexpected I observed a flood of fire issue from an old and delightful oak which remained around 20 yards from our home. Thus soon as the stunning light evaporated, the oak had vanished, and there was basically nothing left except for an impacted stump. At the point when we visited it the following morning, we found the tree broke in a particular way. It was not fragmented by the shock, but rather completely decreased to thin strips of wood. Seen observed nothing so completely annihilated. Before this I was not unacquainted with the more clear laws of power. On this event a man of extraordinary examination in normal way of thinking was with us, and energized by this fiasco, he entered on the clarification of a hypothesis which he had shaped regarding the matter of power and galvanism, which was on the double new and shocking to me. Everything that he expressed tossed significantly into the shade Cornelius Agrippa, Albertus Magnus, and Paracelsus, the masters of my creative mind, yet by some casualty the defeat of these men reluctant me to seek after my acclimated examinations. It appeared to me as though nothing would or might at any point be known. All that had for such a long time drew in my consideration unexpectedly became disgusting. By one of those eccentricities of the psyche which we are maybe generally dependent upon in early youth, I without a moment's delay surrendered my previous occupations, put down normal history and all its descendants as a twisted and fruitless creation, and engaged the best hatred for a future science which would never at any point step inside the edge of genuine information. In this temperament of brain I betook myself to the arithmetic and the parts of study applying to that science as being based upon secure groundworks, thus deserving of my thought. Consequently unusually are our spirits developed, and by such slight tendons are we bound to thriving or ruin. At the point when I think back, it appears to me as though this practically extraordinary difference in tendency and will was the quick idea of the heavenly messenger of my life, the last exertion made by the soul of protection to deflect the tempest that was and still, at the end of the day hanging in the stars and prepared to encompass me. Her triumph was reported by a strange quietness and happiness of soul which followed the surrendering of my old and hitherto torturing examinations. It was hence that I was to be educated to connect evil with their arraignment, joy with their dismissal. It was areas of strength for and of the soul of good, yet it was insufficient. Predetermination was excessively intense, and her permanent regulations had declared my utter and horrendous obliteration.
That's the end of chapter 2 of this story. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please like and subscribe. See ya.